Okay, so let me play for everyone. Finally, Vladimir Putin has addressed this, and he says he does know who the suspects are. So let me play this via translation for everyone.
We,
of course, looked at what kind of people they are, and we know who they are. We found them. I hope they appear and speak about it themselves. This will be best for everyone. There is nothing unusual or criminal there, I assure you.
He's trying to suggest that these are sort of regular civilians. This is quite different from what British Prime Minister Theresa May has suggested, which is that they are Russian military intelligence officers. What are we to do with this information from Putin?
I mean, I think we should prefer the version of the British Prime Minister, frankly. And, you know, this was a terrible event in the use of chemical and toxic material on British soil in order to kill those people. And actually, someone tragically died as a result of it. And, you know, there's a proper and due process in Britain, and these people should go through it, but I don't think that's likely to happen.
But so what message is Putin sending? The fact that this was on British soil, what message does it send to other world leaders?
Well, I think it shows, look, Russia is an extraordinarily difficult phenomenon to deal with, because there's a level at which, in certain areas and on certain topics, you have to work with Russia. And, you know, practically every American president, every British prime minister wants to try and get into the right relationship with Russia of cooperation. But the trouble is, they keep doing these things, not just their actions in relation to what happened in Britain and the poisoning of those people, but also, for example, the interference in the democratic processes all over Europe at the present time. So it's a very, you know, what you've got to do is deal with Russia in two different respects. There will be areas where you're going to work with them per force. And, for example, it's impossible to see a solution in Syria that doesn't at least have Russia at the table. On the other hand, where they do these sorts of behavior, you've got to call them out. There's got to be a punishment attached to it. And it's got to be made absolutely clear what's acceptable and what isn't.
And so what do you make of President Trump's desire to have a close friendship or relationship with Vladimir Putin?
Well, it's the same thing that all American presidents that I can remember. President Obama wanted to do a reset. President Bush thought that he could work with President Putin.
You don't see this in a different light. You don't think that what President Trump is asking for is in a different vein than just what you're describing?
Well, I think the actions of the American administration are what I would look at in respect of it. And those actions actually have been pretty strong. And in relation to what has just happened recently in the UK, the Americans have been strongly in support. But I mean, I understand the desire to work with President Putin in certain areas, but they've got to be called out on this behavior, because certainly over our side of the water, it's having an impact on our politics. I mean, there's no doubt about that. In fact, just recently, for example, in Denmark, there was a whole series of measures that were announced in order to make sure that they uncover exactly what is going on within their country's politics and exactly what elements of those the Russian government and state are responsible for.
And so do you think that someone needs to tell President Trump exactly what kind of threat Vladimir Putin is? Do you think that he understands that?
I'm sure he's been told that many times. So but as I say, you know, to be blunt about it, I'll judge the administration on their actions. Actually, America recently has strengthened its forces in Eastern Europe. I welcome that. So whatever, you know, rhetoric, as it were, came out of the recent NATO meeting, if you actually talk to people at NATO, America, and certainly your Defense Department here, is making a very strong commitment to the defense of Eastern Europe, which is right. Because, you know, the single biggest anxiety I have is not all the, you know, frankly, politics everywhere is in a pretty strange state right now, here and back home and across Europe. The thing that concerns me is that at this moment, this juncture of our history, it's very important that America and Europe rediscover the importance of the transatlantic alliance. It remains the bedrock of our stability, our security, our future prosperity. And in the light of the challenges that are coming down the track at us, that is the single biggest concern I have.
And you think we've forgotten that?
Well, I think it needs to be recalibrated, not just as a strong alliance of interests, but a strong alliance of values. I mean, you know, the reason we like living in our countries is because you have democracy, you have the rule of law, you have a free and independent media, and these are important things to support and protect. And, you know, when I look at the world today, I see two huge challenges. One around Islamist extremism right across the world. My institute's publishing a report on this tomorrow. It shows it's a global phenomenon with many different tentacles. It's important we deal with it and deal with the ideology behind it. And secondly, the rise of China. I mean, my kids and I've now got grandchildren, my grandchildren's future is going to depend to a large degree on a geopolitics that's going to be utterly transformed by the rise of China. That's not a problem, but it is a huge change, and it's a big challenge. We're far better able to deal with China if Europe and America are strong and together.
I know that you do often talk about extremism, and I know that you'll be presenting some of your suggestions tomorrow to the Council on Foreign Relations for what to do, because you're just back from Rwanda and Kenya. Is there any way to boil it down? Is there one thing that we need to know about extremism? Yeah,
you've got to tackle the ideas behind it and not just the violence, because the violence is a security issue. But if you look at what we spend on security, which is enormous, and you look at what we spend on trying to root out the ideas behind this extremism, there's a disequilibrium, an imbalance between the two. We need to do much more to tell countries they've got to reform their education systems, root out prejudice from their curriculum, and we've got to do far more to tackle what is, I think, going to be a big threat, which is the northern part of sub-Saharan Africa, which is at risk of having exploding populations, poverty, and radicalization.
Let's talk about what you're reading. Apparently, a lot of people in the UK are reading Bob Woodward's new book. It has become a bestseller in the UK. It just came out yesterday. Why all the interest?
Well, this is the sort of global soap opera, isn't it? And I haven't read it myself. I mean, I've read about it because you can't really escape it. I mean, the only thing I say to you is, your politics is quite strange right now. Okay, that's I think we can agree on that. But I could take you to the UK, where we have a Conservative government taking us out of Europe, even though, frankly, the leading members think it's a really bad idea, and a Labour Party leadership that's further to the left than anything we've ever seen and is now convulsed by allegations of anti-Semitism. And I could take you from the south, Greece, through Italy, up through the middle of Europe.
So what is happening with this trend?
So what's happening is Western society is dividing in a very, very fundamental way. It's partly because people's incomes for a certain category of people have stagnated, but there's a huge cultural divide going on. And social media is a revolutionary phenomenon. It's changing the nature of the debate. It's changing the way we exchange information. And I think the single biggest problem we have right now in politics is that the idea of building bridges between these two tribes is out of fashion. And it needs to come back into fashion, because otherwise you end up with two groups of people not talking to each other, not listening to each other, and not even liking each other.
We know something about that here. Tony Blair, great to talk to you. Thanks so much. Always great to have you in studio.